Good afternoon and welcome to D&I One-on-One, now a monthly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, belongingness, and all that fun stuff. And today's conversation is the power of listening. And we're going to be talking about all of the things that we can learn by paying attention to more than just the data. Particularly when it comes to diversity data, there's the science of connection, the psychology of belonging, our brain science. That data is important, but it lacks context and richness and depth when you don't hear or think about the stories and the experiences and the perspectives around it. And, listening isn't just hearing. It's what people say and what they don't say, what people are expressing, body language, gestures, observing interactions with people or how people experience you. All of that is listening. And there's so much more we can learn from that. And that's why I'm excited to be talking about it today with my guest, who I'll introduce here in a moment. I am Jina Etienne. I am the creator of the series, and I'm a certified diversity executive. I center my work on something that I call fearless inclusion. I define that as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. And I develop training and workshops and facilitate conversations on topics like this, really around helping people connect mindfulness and self-awareness to their daily actions and words. The goal of that is to be intentional in how we show up at work, with our colleagues, with our peers, and our subordinates to create an environment that is safe, where people can feel connected and really allow their superpowers to rise and do their best work. Joining me today is Claire Costin, a brilliant researcher and professor of accounting at the University of Portland. She grew up in Texas and now she lives in Oregon. So that's Portland, Oregon, not Maine. She's a CPA with an undergraduate degree in music performance, as in piano. She sings, she has a yoga practice, and she loves to knit. From Beethoven to balance sheet, not that hard of a leap, she says. Maybe I'll ask her to explain that in a minute. But really, she said that being a dog mom is 95% of her personality. She's passionate about social justice, and teaching is her favorite part of the job. Claire, thank you for joining me today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, piano and Beethoven, you know what? We were talking briefly in the background here and talking about how there isn't that much of a stretch from music to accounting. And some of that really does have to do with the underlying personalities and the different styles and the mindsets that go into accounting. And I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so, one of the things that I've thought a lot about when I talk about my background with people, they're like, how did you go from, that makes no sense. And in retrospect, I've thought a lot about how, in classical music, it's linear, it's formulaic, it's sequential, it's quantitative, it's got a debit and a credit kind of a thing going on. And then accounting is the same. So I use the same parts of my brain to do the job I do now, just differently. And then in performance, I kind of public speak for a living. So I also, what I learned in that, I apply to my job. But when you teach, I teach things like auditing and ethics and forensic accounting, which are a lot about helping students understand how to use professional judgments in various situations, which sometimes requires a little bit of innovation and creativity. So there's also, I bring that along from the music too. So it's, in retrospect, not as big of a leap as it sounds, but even I myself, I've sometimes looked back and gone, how did I go from there to there? And then I realized it's actually not that far.
Yeah, it's interesting. We could go on and on. I actually studied music theory. And the reason I think that this is important, though, is some of that also has to do with the diversity of the way we show up, right? Like the way that the connection between the processes in the brain, accounting and music. But it also, the thing about music that I think is beautiful is that it's a really great representation of diversity. All of these different instruments come together to create these unique sounds, different styles of movement. The same piece can sound so different. And when you have diversity in the room, look at the power of what that brings. And you get to see this every day in the classroom. You see the diversity of the future of our profession. And one of the things that when we were brainstorming this webinar, we were talking about why paying attention to the students in the room. It's like they teach us more. We talk about that all the time. Our kids, we learn so much from our kids. Well, this is true from the students and listening to them. Can you talk a little bit more about, when you say listening, when my opening remarks were, it's not just what they're saying, but it's what they're not saying. It's how they're interpreting the data. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think, I've noticed I've been an academic for almost 15 years, and especially in the last few years, I've seen just a shift in how I don't want to call them kids because they're grown adults, but in how the students that I have learn and how they process. And they just, I am constantly, I'm blown away. Sometimes I will, be talking about something and they'll just pipe up with something totally out of nowhere. And I'm like, that is the best, just absolutely. So here's for example, from one of my students. I was teaching auditing and we were talking about type 1 and type 2 errors and the risk of incorrect acceptance versus rejection. So either you as an auditor issue an unqualified opinion when you shouldn't, or maybe you issue other than unqualified when actually everything is fine. And I was saying, in auditing, we primarily care about this risk of incorrect acceptance and issuing an unqualified opinion when the financials are material and misstated. And the student spoke up and said, but what about from the client's perspective? Because wouldn't they be more concerned about the other type of error, which is issuing an opinion saying there's a problem when there's not? And I said, you are so right. And that is, I have now, every time I teach this in auditing, I bring that and I mention to my students, I say, this is what we as auditors think about, but from the client's perspective, which would you care about? And so just that one comment, and she just couldn't believe it. She's like, but wait a minute, from this other side. So just that idea, it's a for example of how they inspire me and really just blow me away every day.
Well, I think what we should do is launch a polling question. So, Autumn, let's launch the first polling question.
Sure, let me get that up and running. There we are. Y'all can go ahead and cast your vote.
Yeah, by 2025, this is the one, right? What percentage of the workforce will Gen Z represent? And, Claire, I didn't write this down, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you know off the top of your head. Gen Z they are in their 20s, mid-20s to like late teens. Do I have that right?
I think it starts at 1995 is the first year, I believe, if I'm not misremembering myself. And then I don't remember when Gen Alpha started but I want to say 95 to somewhere in the tens maybe are the years. So whatever that works out to.
Google it really quickly. That's what I should be doing.
I know.
But I think the reason we wanted to ask this is, and I think what's interesting is we have these preconceived ideas. Like we stereotype people by generation. We do it for all the generations, but I think there are very particular stereotypes around millennials and Gen Zs. And I don't even think people think Gen Z is in the workplace today. But you are teaching them at university today, and they will be showing up in the workforce tomorrow more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. And they are, I keep thinking to myself, like I'm just on the cusp of millennial, and I qualify as and identify as a millennial, and I kind of have reached the point of feeling like I'm not sure that my generation is going to fix the problems in the world. And I just, as I am privileged to experience being around these students and talk to them and get to know them and just watch them and how much they just want to change the world. I kind of like, okay, I have a lot of hope for our future. I really do think that they have the capacity to maybe help fix some of the problems that we have, but they're an amazing, they're an amazing force.
So I'm looking at the answers. Is the poll closed, Autumn?
Yes, I'll close it once you get done talking about it.
Oh, I want to, can I see the answers? Are these the real ones that I'm seeing?
Oh, very close to it. Yes. Okay.
So Claire, the correct answer is?
I actually don't know.
Oh, it's 19%, I think it was, that I looked up. And I have a here note that says 27% of the workforce across the globe. Oh no, so it is C, 27%. See, I should have written this down myself. And I see here that 27% of the people said
27%.
Oh, I don't know how to read these answers. Listen, before we have a family saying, stop before you hurt yourself. I'm stopping. because I clearly don't know how to read the poll. Let's talk about something you just started mentioning, and that was the what accountants, what you say to your students, and wouldn't a client be more worried about this versus that? And as I'm listening to you talking, I'm thinking about how there's this chasm, if you will, that I've observed, and that is that in your world, academia, you're preparing students for the for the workplace, but you're preparing them in terms of academic knowledge and skills. They're going to need to have some fundamental knowledge to do the work. On the other side, you have um, the accounting industry looking at the colleges and universities, thinking you're going to make them get them ready to take the CPA exam. And then we're asking ourselves, but where does diversity fit into all this? And there's diversity in two ways that you framed it. Getting people to study accounting, that's the first thing, because there's a lack of diversity in that group. Getting people to pursue the CPA, and then getting them to move into the profession in all levels of readiness. So diversity makes all of that more complicated. All right, I just put a bunch of stuff out there, tossing it over to you to make it all make sense.
Yeah, so I think that, it feels like we have kind of multiple conversations happening when we talk about our pipeline and we talk about the route of getting people into the profession, and also the kind of longevity and health of the profession. And in one respect, in the academy, we're thinking about how we get students to the major, how we get students interested, how we kind of break the stereotypes about what accounting is. And then once folks are out of their degree, what is it that we need to provide to get folks on that path to certification? And I think that sometimes, our expectations about what people need or what they want are not necessarily what they're telling us. And sometimes they can tell us with their words and sometimes they can't. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I feel like sometimes the academy and the profession are kind of talking across each other. And so we have, all ultimately the same goal, which is to get people into the profession and to be successful professionals. And it's just the priorities of each are different. And so it feels like sometimes, I think this graphic that you're using here with the bridge, it feels like we just aren't quite on the same page about what needs to happen.
We can see the other side, but we don't necessarily know how to get there and how to make the connection.
Right.
Oh, no. So I was just going to bring us back to this slide because we talked about, listening and who do we need to listen to. And there are quite a number of different groups here. So some of them are the students, but what you don't have on this list, and I just realized this, is your colleagues. I mean, what is it that we should be listening to, or what should your colleagues be listening to on campus? What about the professional needs? What about the data? You actually are part of a group that's been doing some significant research in terms of the diversity in the space. And then recruiters. So there were these 4 different groups we put down here. Can you help explain to people when we say listen, what do we mean for the different groups?
So I think that, again, it's, for me at least, I think about it as in terms of understanding what each group needs and what is going to help each group be successful. And in terms of, diversity within the profession, so you mentioned the research study that I'm in. If we want to listen to the research, we want to listen to the data. Some of the data shows, and I'll just kind of give a little bit of background on this study. A group that I work with sent a study to several professionals around the country, from small firms to big firms in industry and public practice, and asked them about how they prioritize DEI and their opinions about DEI, where they are in their DEI journey, where their organization is, what resources would help them the most. And so what we found in the data was, just really interesting kind of, there's general results and then there's also kind of specific results. So, and I think one of these might be a poll question. So I don't know if I'm bearing the lead or if it's okay to share this now. But as we're looking at, for example, one of the questions that was asked was of the folks in the profession, where are you in terms of your role with DEI in your profession? And they had options like, I'm a bystander, or I'm a champion, I'm an implementer, I'm an auditor, where are you? And the plurality of people said they were bystanders. So they didn't really, which means I don't have anything to do with it. I'm just kind of on the side.
Right.
And then we also asked in that survey, what is your aspirational role in diversity, equity, and inclusion within your profession, within your organization? And most of the people, the vast majority of people who identified as bystanders had that as their aspirational role. So they kind of had nothing to do with it, wanted nothing to do with it. And so we're thinking about, okay, well, what does this mean? Is like, how do we even advance this, profession? How do we make progress in this area? And what we look at is there's the small group of people who identify as bystanders but want to move to a different role. Like, that's the group that we want to try and reach out to, because maybe they don't have the data, the tools, the resources they need, but they want to get there. And so part of the listening in terms of the research is recognizing where people are in the profession, recognizing that certain people in the profession are very interested. We found differences across different practice areas. We found differences in terms of position of leadership in the firm, and maybe unsurprisingly, folks who are in executive leadership positions were majority bystanders and preferred to continue staying bystanders, and the folks who were more entry-level staff were the ones who really wanted it to be a part of it. So I think, Jina, something that you said when we served on a panel together about diversity, and someone had asked us, well, how do we get people to buy in if you've got the folks in leadership who are not interested in talking about it and don't want to think about it and don't think it's important, don't think it's a priority? And your response was, you help them understand that it's all encompassing, that diversity includes them as well. And so I think, again, it's, and I think you might have been the one who shared a story about someone who kind of that flipped a switch in their mind, and they said, oh, wait, like here's the thing about my intersectional identity that, makes me unique and diverse. And all of a sudden that person was able to see and then hear and listen to those around them who were saying, this is my experience from my intersectional identity. And it helped start to kind of, shift the conversation in that particular organization, in that example you gave.
Yeah, that I think a lot of people can start to see when we broadened the lens that all of us are involved in diversity and inclusion. So I want to switch gears here, because this slide I thought is a really good place to start. When you and I were talking, we had so many conversations around this topic. And so much of the power of listening concept we started with was the students are telling us a lot. We are seeing it in the classrooms. It is showing up in the workplace. And it's important for us as a professional body, so that's academia and those of us in the profession, to hear and understand what it is that this generation is telling us. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it is you've observed in the classroom? Because you've got some amazing stories.
I do. And, there's also academic research to back up, this list of items here from Gen Z as they've been surveyed and asked these questions. And one thing that I've noticed that is kind of just, especially in the last few years, is when you ask them, what do you want to do with your life and where do you want to go and what are you interested in? What's the next step for you? They really do. They want to change the world. They want to make it a better place. I've had more students express an interest in nonprofit work or government work than ever in my 15 years as an academic, because they feel like it's giving back to the general public and the government, or giving to a mission that they support in nonprofit. I give a project in my intermediate accounting class, and I ask them in their financial analysis study of a public company to also identify either in the environmental social governance, which we know as ESG, to pick one of the three pillars and kind of analyze and discuss the what does the company say they're doing? What did the results say that they're doing? And then present it at the end of the semester. And this past fall, when I did this project, I was, again, as I am constantly blown away by my students, I had a group get up and talk about a public company. And they're like, here's what they say about environment, but here's what they're doing. There are no receipts. They're not doing it. It's greenwashing. And they were just like so passionate about this finding in this project. And it's in their accounting class. And it just, to me, that is just one of many examples of times that I've heard my students talk about wanting to affect positive change in the world. And more than just like, I want a stable career. And, they want all of those things too, but they really do want to feel like they're making a difference. The short attention span thing is also real. I have, and there's a lot of research about this, but I've noticed that I can't speak for too long before they kind of start to wander. So I try to keep it in short sound bites of, like bite-sized chunks of me, and then I give it to them to do some speaking with each other or work a practice problem or that kind of thing. But just the social media age and the technology age that we live in, and that has been pervasive their entire lives, is contributing to a much shorter attention span. So the way that they listen and their ability to process information is different than maybe some of us. The self-advocacy piece is something that I really have a lot of respect that my students will come to me and say, hey, you know what, like I need a mental health day, or I'm struggling with this. And they're going through all kinds of stuff. If you think about, I think somebody posted in the chat that 1997 to 2013, this is the Gen Z years.
Yep.
And if you think about everything that has happened in the world since 1997 to now, everything that they have lived through, the wild swings up and the wild swings down, and multiple stock market crashes and all kinds of things. It's a hard time to be a human being right now, full stop.
Yeah.
And for them, they're carrying all of this. They're more aware of what's going on. I felt like, compared to them, I was living under a rock when I was an undergrad, and they know what's going on in the world and it matters to them. So they're carrying that. And one thing I really appreciate is when they will say, I just don't have it in me. I can't do it. I need some extra time. I need some extra help. I need some support. And they're more willing, and not all of them, some students still struggle, but I've seen an increase in students, willingness to and wanting to advocate for themselves when they need extra help and support.
So from you were saying something that, and I thought, I'm going to pop the slide up here, because this idea of diversity, most of us have historically thought of it as all the stuff at the top, the stuff that you can see. And what we are now knowing, and in particular, what Gen Z is making very clear to us, millennials more, Gen Z even more, is that all of the stuff at the bottom, that's very hard to see. It's deep down. For most of us, it's invisible, but it is very much a part of who we are. And I was writing down here from what you said, that they have a short attention span and you have to change things up in the classroom. And I thought, the social connectivity, this is the generation that grew up with a cell phone in their hand. So they have awareness about what's happening globally all day, all the time. And it's created this awareness, just looking at this iceberg, they are aware of things within themselves, about each other, about the context of the environment that we're in. Like you said, I've been working on my own self-awareness forever. And I think I'm starting to put these things, maybe in the last 10, 15 years. So this, I think, is an important thing to think about for those of us for those listening, that if you have people that you're leading or you're looking to hire and recruit people, they're coming at you with this totality, this intersectional identity. They're not just a woman or somebody with a different ability. They're a combination of things.
And they are, and we always have been. I think human beings have always been, every person is just this beautiful tapestry of their lived experiences and their identities. And one thing that I've noticed and that I'm experiencing from this generation too is how much they value diversity and how much they are, and not that social media bullying and things don't go on, because they do, but my experience, and I'm fortunate because I have phenomenal students. I cannot say enough good things about them, but they are so accepting of one another, and they invite people into the group, and they, I have a student who is I adore, who's a male identifying student who wears these fabulous like poodle skirt sets, just like Japanese poodle skirt sets that like straight out of the 1950s. And the student is just like fashion sense is impeccable. And I have never once heard any, and this is an accounting major, I've never once heard a another student in the class say anything disparaging, and they're just like, okay, that's how this student dresses and that's who this student is. And so I've experienced, and I think there's research to show that this generation really does value diverse experiences and diverse backgrounds, and they welcome that.
Fierce individuality, right? Like that they own it and they believe it and they value it and appreciate it. So what I want to do is I want to open our second polling question so that the CPE ticker keeps rolling. And while that's open, you shared a story. You're talking about experiences and identities and this diversity. And you shared a story of a young woman who had a very different experience in our profession. Can you talk about that? Share that story while the poll is open, maybe?
Sure. So I had a student, a former student now, who's in the profession, who is an Asian American student, and shared with me that they had, she's a woman identifying person, that she had changed, kind of backed out of a job offer with the firm and moved to a different firm. And I was like, tell me more about this. And she shared that the firm that she had done her internship in, where she had been offered a job out of college, she was like a campus ambassador for that firm. So she was kind of part of the recruiting efforts and help other students understand about the benefits of the firm. And she was also a leader in the accounting association that planned our Meet the Firms nights. And so she shared with me that one of the reasons that she was moving to this other firm, and she ended up doing so, is because of what she felt like were microaggressions. And so in this example for our Meet the Firms night, the recruiter from the firm where she had been hired, where she was a campus ambassador, where she was, again, in the leadership of the accounting association, the recruiter of her own firm came to our Meet the Firms night with 3 white male students from a different university. And she said, maybe it's me. I feel like I'm crazy. Maybe I'm overreacting. And I said, no, she said, I didn't even know that they were bringing campus ambassadors to Meet the Firms nights. And I am one, and I'm the leader of this organization. And then they're just showing up with 3 people who don't look like me. And I didn't feel safe and comfortable. And so she left that firm. And she told me that I think there were 1 or 2 other Asian American women in that class who also declined offers from that firm. And all of this, particularly, it was from the recruiter that she was experiencing most of these, but that was enough for her to say, I can't work for them. And so they lost the opportunity to have a really amazing staff person because of her experience.
On the flip side, I think part of what that talks about, first of all, I think it's really important for us to recognize that microaggressions are a very real thing, but it's not something we've always talked about. And this isn't just something that women experience or that people of color experience. If any of you listening today have been in a situation where somebody has made a comment, they might have thought it was funny, they might have thought it was sort of a neutral, safe thing to say, and yet inside you felt hurt or you felt like embarrassment, then you know what a microaggression feels like. And so we've all felt them. It's just when you are one of the only ones in the room, or perhaps somebody who's very different than others, the data tells us they happen more often. If you're in a group that's diverse, it happens a little bit less because everybody respects, sees, and values that diversity. It's not the same because when you're around a group that's very diverse, something different happens in terms of the dynamics, the communication. It tends to be more fluid, more open, more accepting. And there's psychological safety. I don't even know why I put that in air quotes. There's psychological safety in the space when everybody values and appreciates those differences. And I think as firms get to become more diverse, we know some firms are more diverse. This is the experience they're going to have, and they're going to be less and less of this that are happening. But it's really about awareness and understanding that we have an opportunity to improve retention, to improve recruiting, if we can be mindful of these interactive experiences. It's not just technical.
Right. Right. And there's there's a study that was released also just as a point that I think, and along these lines by the Illinois State Society, a group of students who had participated in a scholarship program named after Mary T. Washington Wiley, who was the first Black woman to be a CPA in this country. And they were young professionals. And so they were kind of, okay, like now you're in the profession, what's your experience like? And, you know, how's it going for you? And these are people of color. And many of them um, reported having experienced microaggressions in the first, you know, year and a half, 2 years of their employment once they got into the profession. And so it was, you know, just kind of not just the one anecdotal experience that I have from my student, but it is something that happens. And I think that it's also sometimes it's difficult for us to on the you know, perpetuating end to necessarily maybe recognize when we're saying something that you know, is going to be received as a microaggression. And this may be in part because of implicit biases that we have, which I've done some research in that area. And, you know, I think hopefully folks are, you know, experienced and understand that implicit bias by its very nature is bias that we don't consciously realize that we have. So it's just our learned ideas about certain groups of people or about certain ideas that lead us to have thoughts and then say things, and we may not even realize that it's coming across a certain way. And you know, this recruiter may have had no bad intent in showing up in at the Meet the Firms night with these other students, and you know, may not have even occurred to this person how it would have been received by the student that, you know, who was not invited to be a part of it. But you know, it was received by that student that way, and that experience is valid. And that student no longer felt, and now a young professional, but no longer felt safe working at that firm, and again went somewhere else because they wanted to feel safe.
By the way, in case you're curious, I'm just looking at the results from that poll, and you know, the DEI experience level of most employees. I have novice came in at 49% is where most people classified people. I don't have the data slides in front of me. I should have kept those open because that was part of the research that you did, where you were trying to figure out what was the role that people played, what was the role that they wanted to play, how important is this work, what type of work. And so it was just really interesting to know that for the most part, very few people were doing this full time or raising their hand and having significant responsibility. So there's a lot of talk about DEI work, but there isn't necessarily a lot of role and responsibility behind the work.
Right. And novice is actually, that's the correct answer to this question. The majority of people either said they were uninitiated, as in like they didn't have any information, or they had, you know, done no work in it, or they were just kind of dipping their toe in. And I think that sometimes it feels like it may feel like for some folks that they have to go, you just all in and you just 100% into this.
Right.
It's like you are, you aren't. And it's actually, you know, there's a continuum. And the work that we do, little, you know, baby steps and progress is still progress. And so when we think about where people are, some of, you know, in terms of the listening piece here again, if we understand where people are in their personal journey and where they are in their workplace, and maybe they want to be somewhere else, and if we understand that, then we can start to think about what resources do you need to help you get there. Is it, you know, do we want, maybe is it case studies that we provide, or advisors that you can, like a catalog of advisors or whatever it may be, but it's just understanding where people are and how they feel about their role in DEI within their organization to help advance it. And again, you know, DEI is not just racial identity, gender identity, you know, the religious identity, the most common things. It's all of these things, and it affects every single person at the firm. And so sometimes I think also, just like the academy and the profession sometimes talk across each other, I feel like, you know, I know within my own academy, within, you know, sometimes within a single class, I'll have students who are kind of saying the same thing but using different languages, and they're kind of talking across each other. And it's just you know, when we can step back and listen to what they're saying and also what they're doing and what they're not saying, I think it helps us to come together more and start to make progress towards a more inclusive and diverse profession.
I want to switch gears to this slide. I don't want to not talk about it because on the Understanding Gen Z slide, there's a bullet, mental health struggles. And a moment ago, you said, when we know how people feel and where they are, I think that phrase comes up a lot, but I don't know that we think about it in the context of D&I, workplace culture, and our Gen Z, the youngest people coming into the profession through college and into career. Are you starting to see this in the classroom and as a result, where and how it might translate into early career?
In terms of their like higher stress and anxiety levels,
Yes.
is that, oh yeah. I mean, and this is, I think, common across academies, not just accounting, and especially post-COVID. I have seen students really struggle, and I've seen students struggle to, when it comes to understanding things that maybe didn't see the struggles before, and it may be that they struggled before and just weren't comfortable expressing that they were struggling, but they're constantly, I think they just feel like they're trying to meet all these expectations that they've set for themselves, that their parents have set, that they feel like their professors have set, that some professors have set, and then they're worried that they're falling short. And they're just, trying to do, I may tell them that just dealing with their professors is like herding cats. That's like a full-time job in and of itself. And I certainly, want to do whatever I can to try, and the trauma-informed educational practices, part of that includes collaboration and co-creation. And so I really work with my students to try and help it be a classroom experience that's going to be, meaningful to them, where they can focus on the learning versus being, focused on a grade or a certain outcome. But they're just, I have students who sometimes I always record my classes on a Zoom call, and then I post them to my classroom, website, so that students who can't be there, if they're sick or something is going on, I have student athletes, people who have jobs, they're caregivers for their family, they're, commuting to campus, and there's issues with transportation or whatever it may be, so that they can still participate. But I've also had students just say, like, I'm dealing with depression and I'm having a really hard time getting up today. I can't be in class, but I want to participate if I can. And I just feel like there's a lot of struggles. And from the way that translates to the profession, this is kind of that, once you get them to the major and then we're in the profession and thinking about the CPA, there's some research that has been published by the Illinois State Society that looked at kind of what are the barriers or the challenges to people in the profession who are, maybe trying to decide whether or not to get the CPA license. And for a lot of folks, it was work time and personal time. And so it's the expectations placed on them to complete a certain task in a certain number of hours that maybe they can or maybe they can't complete. And then they're not having enough time to study for the exam. And they also, I think, are very, they're mindful that they need to sometimes set boundaries and they need to take time for them. And then they will set aside time to go do something that brings them joy in their lives. And so they're not going to work 27 hours a day, because they recognize that they have these issues with stress and anxiety, and they need to take some time to reset and recharge.
So playing devil's advocate then for a moment, because I know I've heard this. What say you to the people who would think, listen, this is a tough profession, the work is hard, suck it up. Right? That we don't need to, or we shouldn't need to cater to this, or we shouldn't, put these kids in, like, what is it, handle them with kid gloves, what's the saying? Because then there's going to be the harsh reality of the profession, and they're not going to be prepared. So which side is it? Is it we need to harden them up to get ready for the profession, or does the profession really need to think differently about culture and people?
I mean, I have an opinion, and mine is not the only opinion to have, but to that I say they're human beings first. like number one, before they're anything else, they're not their jobs. They don't identify as their jobs. They're human beings with whole rich experiences and lives, and they have just the hopefully years and years and decades ahead of them to experience the world. And so I feel like one of the things that is most important to me is to meet my students where they are and recognize that first and foremost, they are human beings. And, I'm fortunate, and as an instructor, we ask our students every semester to evaluate their classes and to give us their feedback and to share their experience of being in our class. And not to toot my own horn, but a consistent theme that I see in evaluation comments from students is, this professor cared about me, and I could tell this professor saw me as a human being, and this professor wanted to work with me and to support me, and I felt like I was able to to try and learn, and it was okay if I made a mistake. I could come back from that. And I think that to me, I would much rather know that my students are feeling heard and supported and validated and treated like humans, because I care more about that than I do anything else.
Let's go ahead and open our third polling question. I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we're pacing them along. So this one is about how DEI objectives rank against other strategic priorities. And I think this one is a really important one, especially as part of this conversation. I want to go to this last slide where we talk about what can we do. So I am a DEI practitioner. I hesitate to say that sometimes because people put DEI in a box. I am of the mindset that we should be weaving the thoughts and the styles, the perspectives, the background, the science behind DEI into our work, but not necessarily developing DEI specific strategies, right? So this question is a bit of a tricky question. How important is it? But by the same token, when you look at these things about what can we do, you don't need a DEI strategy to do these things. But these things can be meaningful and make a difference. I love the first one. Ask them. We ask a lot in our profession, but we don't stop and listen. Too often, it's a top-down profession. The partner says, the staff does. What can we learn if we could sit in the classroom for just, I won't say a day, but let's say I'm in the classroom for a couple of days. Is there some theme that I would be able to walk away with like, oh, wow, I get it?
I don't know if I can pinpoint a single theme, but I think some of what you would walk away from if you were to sit in the classroom with students who are students today is that they are social beings. They connect with each other a lot. Having that time to connect is really important. Taking brief brain breaks is really important. So I also, there's research that shows that looking at pictures of animals is reduces stress and anxiety and kind of lowers our blood pressure and helps us calm down. So I insert slides with pictures or short videos of animals throughout my PowerPoint just to say, okay, let's take a 15-second brain break, reset, and then, move on down the road. So I think also just understanding that it helps for them to be able to kind of have those resets is something. And I think that there's a genuine desire to learn and a genuine desire to understand. And also sometimes, and it's inherent it's just built into the classroom dynamic, but a fear to fail, a fear to get it wrong. And so, partly just because I'm a human being also, and I don't always say everything perfectly or things don't come out right, I try and help them understand. And from the get-go, my first day of class slides, one of the things we talk about as we're going through is talk about failure. And I say, look, football quarterbacks throw interceptions and baseball players strike out, and Taylor Swift sometimes forgets the lyrics to her own songs. Everyone fails at times, and it's okay. And so what's really important to me is to help them understand that I want them to feel safe enough to take intellectual risks and try to answer a question. And if they get it wrong, know that that's okay, because that's part of the learning, and we can work together to talk about what is, what it was. And it's how to get to the right answer if there is a specific right answer. So I think that, just again, and maybe it's just, I'm not the only, everybody has different approaches in the classroom. And I have plenty of colleagues who are probably 180-degree opposite from me in terms of how they approach their classroom. But to me, it's a group experience of different humans who bring different lived experiences, different learning styles, different learning speeds, different, learning abilities. And so I'm trying to find a way to incorporate as many different modalities and methods as I can pedagogically to reach as many students as possible. But I think that, you would find that they're sensitive and compassionate human beings who really want to do good in the world and are excited to join a profession where they feel like they have the chance to do that.
So I'm thinking about a couple of different things. If you look at that diversity iceberg and you think of that iceberg, let me pull it back up again. If you think of that iceberg as just me, so I'm looking at that iceberg and I'm thinking about all the different components and elements of my identity. And some of them, I might add some that aren't there or take some of the ones that are there off. But that diversity has been there the whole time. It's not like I'm spontaneously more diverse now because we're talking about it. Right. So what that got me thinking about is back in the day when I was in college, I remember sitting in cost accounting. I was sitting in intermediate accounting, and all of the things that you're talking about are coming up in the classroom. There was none of that. And yet all of our human experience was there. So the difference is today, society has gotten to the point where collectively as a society, we're talking about these things. So it's in the classroom. Naturally, it's in the workplace. And so I think that what you're talking about, these students, they are aware of this. And as a result, are holding us accountable for creating spaces. Otherwise, they're going to leave. They're going to pick a different university. They're going to pick a different professor. They do that, right? They get to pick which professor that they're going to sit, whose class they're going to take, or which job they're going to take. So I think it's important for us to recognize that this isn't just, feel good. We want everybody to feel good and have a lollipop. This is really about us all understanding more collectively as a society and how that translates into our workplaces, into academia.
Right. And, I come back to, aren't we all human beings first?
Yeah.
And I think that more than anything else, we as a society, we in the classroom, in the profession, in any group, we are better when we hear each other, we listen to each other, when we collaborate with each other, and we recognize each other as the, diverse. Again, it's everybody's this beautiful tapestry of their lived experiences and their identities. And so when we recognize each other as such and we see each other and we hear each other, and I learn all the time from my students, and sometimes it's about, the things they say. So like another example is one day I was teaching in a fraud and forensic class, and I was saying something from the textbook, and the author had written something about, the difference between fraud and abuse. And, fraud is like stealing inventory, and abuse is, taking sick days, but you're not sick, kind of. That was the example given. And I had a student raise their hand and say, well, there's a lot of different reasons that you might need time off, and different, sick manifests in different ways, and you can take sick days and not appear sick but still need the sick day. And I said, you are so right. And I absolutely, I commend you for saying that. And after it was over, they came up and said, hey, look, I wasn't trying to, blow things up. And I said, no, that was and this was a cross-listed course. So this was a graduate student that was also taking classes with undergrads. And I said, this is really important for, the undergrads to see this model, that one, it's okay to push back and ask me a question or to challenge what I'm saying. And two, you weren't wrong. You were absolutely right. And, I need to go write a letter to the publisher of this book and say, hey, this is something you might want to look at for a future edition, because it's kind of there's a whole, there's something that's missing here by not acknowledging that to be the case.
Well, and in that simple example, we are starting to see that exact change in language and terminology show up in policies and practices and language in businesses. Today, a lot of people just have paid time off. There's not sick leave. We don't have maternity leave anymore. We have parental leave because You don't have to be the one who had gave birth to be the parent to take time off. And so what do you do about somebody who's adopting a child? So I think the language that we're using has changed. That's an example of it. That's an example of this collective awareness. Now that we know better, we do better. And by better, we're serving the majority, not just serving a particular group.
Right.
I want to just wrap us up. I'm looking at the time. We have about 5 minutes or so. And where's this slide? So I want, if you don't mind, and we didn't really plan this out necessarily. Like I didn't have these questions for you in advance, but I'm thinking about the bullet recruiters. So if you could speak to somebody who's a recruiter and you're thinking about your students and what would it be good for them to know? Like if I'm listening and I'm hearing these changes and these different expectations, what should I be keeping in mind the next time I sit down with a student?
I think, you know, and I would hope that a lot of folks who are in the recruiting space do this really well, because that's a big part of your job, is having these conversations. But I think being able to communicate with them and try and find out what it is that they need to be successful and what tools they need to be empowered to be successful. I think that also, you know, students, as much as they may have some, you know, bargaining power when it comes to getting a job, because it's like the firm's trying to sell itself, they're trying to sell themselves to the firm. They are often, as we all have imposter syndrome, they all feel like you know, and I've had, especially like some of my first generation students or some of my students from, you know, traditionally underrepresented backgrounds, I don't even know what to say or what to do. And I'm worried they're not going to like me, and they're not going to, you know, think that I have value or think that I'm qualified. And so I think also just, you know, remembering that they're coming to this from a place of, you know, we were all there once, right? Like we were all, once upon a time, we were all students. And once upon a time, we were new in the profession and we were looking for our first job. And once upon a time, we didn't have a CPA license, or we were just starting the process of studying for the exam. And so I think, you know, and we have talked about the, you know, the quote that we mentioned in one of our conversations prior to this, Jina, just about not forgetting what it's like to be young, that, you know, this youth cannot know how age thinks and feels, but old men are guilty if they forget what it was to be young. And so I think just recognizing and remembering what it's like to be where they were, and yeah, kind of seeing them for where they are is something that's helpful. But I keep coming back to it. They're human beings first, and they want to be heard and validated and seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that there's so much to be said here. I think the biggest challenge in this space, if we could just take the words DEI off of it for a moment, what we're talking about is noticing that there are trends and changes that are happening in society. There are things like we know, not just from COVID, but the Surgeon General came out with a report. There's this white paper that I shared. I think it's the one on the slide. Was this the one that Deloitte did? Yeah, this is a Deloitte white paper that specifically was looking at Gen Z and millennials in the workplace and how this, what this has to do with mental health in the workplace. We have data. And at the beginning, I said, data isn't enough. It's important. We need data for context, but we need to look at and understand what people are experiencing and telling us. They're telling us, literally telling us. And then they are telling us because they are leaving. So they're telling us in actions. They're telling us because they aren't giving us feedback at all. That might be a sign that there's a lack of trust. And so I think when we talk about listening, and the reason why I was really excited to talk with you is that listening isn't just, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, but it's looking at everything, not just the data, but the context of what's happening. Your students are telling you every day, and it's just a matter of, as a profession, we should be listening to that. There weren't a lot of questions in the queue, by the way. I did notice somebody asked, and I'd love to get your opinion. This came out earlier. What do you think about the 5th year? And so the time spent in the 5th year versus the pay, will this impact people coming into the profession and or becoming a CPA?
It's an interesting question. Some of the research shows that the primary barriers to, and I acknowledge the study that the Illinois State Society has done. It's not the fifth year so much as it is just not having time to, when it comes to getting a certification, just not having time to study for the exam. In terms of joining the profession, I think that the fifth year is a barrier, especially as I think about my students who are, first generation, or my students who come from underrepresented backgrounds, or my students who are caregivers for their family. They need to get out of college and they need to start working and they need to start earning. And a year of earning lost is, they can't afford to do it. So I think that, I worry about some of the barriers to access and some of the equity related issues of the fifth year. But I think too that, research also shows, and, I've seen some data that pay outcomes is a big part of it. And, they want to feel like they're being compensated for their work. And what I see a lot in my space is students who are trying to decide between maybe accounting and finance. And right now finance is paying better and finance has the jobs. So we lose them to that major. So I think it's a combination of them. But I have heard that, at least in Minnesota, there's a law working its way through the state legislature that would codify either 120 hours and 2 years of work experience, or 150 hours and 1 year of work experience for licensure. And the hope would be that there would be more interest in accounting, because there would now be students who could graduate after 4 years and just maybe spend a little bit of extra time working to get their license. So I would love to see that happen, more places, just to give more people an opportunity to enter the profession.
That was a long one, because that's a whole nother webinar. It's funny because that's even more about what's happening behind the data.